Welcome back to this next instalment of the Renters' Rights Bill Landlord Survival Guide, powered by Title Guardian. And I am joined for this instalment by somebody with 22 years of experience in the sector. It is the lovely Theresa Wallace. And Theresa, you were co-founder of the Lettings Industry Council. You've been a landlord, a tenant and a letting agent for Savills. So you've got a wealth of experience and you can see it from all sides. So it's great to have you as a contributor. And really, I always start with this question. You know, we've got the Renters' Rights Bill coming in 2025 at some point. How momentous are the changes in your opinion?
Oh, I think they're huge. I think these will be the biggest changes we have seen since the Housing Act 1988 was introduced. So lots of changes. But I also think it's really important that landlords don't panic. I know we've got landlords out there who are very concerned, and I don't think they need to be. I don't think tenants are going to suddenly change their behaviour. They're not going to suddenly start moving out after 2 or 3 months, and I know that's a concern. So I think it is, look, just keep calm. The industry will adapt, and we will deal with the changes. But there are a lot coming.
There are, and you know, we're getting to know the legislation because it's not set in stone yet.
No.
It's moving through Parliament and there will be a few tweaks along the way. And what were the kind of key things that really jumped out at you about the new legislation?
Well, one of the biggest concerns, certainly for landlords, is losing Section 21. So that is a concern to them. But of course, there are other grounds coming in that they can use instead. But that, I think, is a big concern. I also think that if they do want to sell their property, and so you serve your notice, your ground one notice, your
4 months.
Leaves. Yes, it's 4 months notice. You're right, until they move out. So your tenant moves out and then you market your property for sale. And if you sell it, that's great. But of course, if it doesn't sell, it's this period of time which is 12 months from when the tenant moves out at the end of that 4-month notice period, before you could then go back to let it. Now, we have to remember that tenants will serve notice themselves and move out. So if a landlord wants to market the property because the tenant served notice, then that's completely different. They can market it. If it doesn't sell, they can come back to the lettings market. But I think what this means is if a landlord does want to sell and they have to serve that 4-month notice, they have to be very sure on what the market's doing and the price that they're looking for, and that they can achieve that price. I think that's going to be the difference. Now people test the market sometimes. If they can't get the figure that they want, then they just go back to lettings. So that will be a change.
I suspect we will see a lot more landlord-to-landlord sales.
I
going forwards, which is actually a good thing.
I hope so. It is a good thing because we are desperate for the stock. I think it's unfortunate that some landlords are selling now because of their concerns. But of course, that just gives you that bigger imbalance between the supply and the demand. And we desperately need more stock in the private rented sector.
Indeed.
But that's a big positive for landlords.
Now, I've always been a huge fan of a fully managed service. All of our properties are fully managed and have been for 20 odd years. And I always certainly direct newcomer landlords to a fully managed service while they're kind of understanding the level of work that's required and obviously all of this legislation that you have to be compliant to. I do think a fully managed service is probably going to become an even more popular option going forwards due to the Renters' Rights Bill. Could you just highlight some of the benefits? Because obviously compliance is probably the number one thing.
I think you are definitely right. And when they changed the legislation in Wales, a lot of the let-only managing themselves landlords moved over to a managed service, because we've got so many laws and regulations out there at the moment, but with this new bill coming in, introducing so many changes, I don't know how a landlord can actually get to grips with, unless they want to read the 146 different things that are in there and the 6 schedules. How else do you really get to understand how you can be compliant? And it's not that landlords are non-compliant deliberately, the majority of landlords are very good, but you can fall foul of the legislation just because you don't understand it. So I think a good agent, that's qualified, that's got training, let them take the heat and let them take, the stress of that and do all of the compliance for you.
How can landlords find their way to a compliant, properly regulated letting agent? There are certain things to look out for, aren't there?
There are. First of all, we have two main professional bodies. We have Property Mark and we have the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. So if your agent is a member of either of those professional bodies, then those professional bodies help with training and keeping their members up to date. So that's certainly one thing to look for. But I think it's also asking questions. Ask your agent about this new bill. What do they know about it? How does the agent think it's going to impact landlords? And I think, that's how you learn, is to find out what they know about it. But there are a lot of very good agents out there. But like in every industry, you've also got some that aren't so good. And it is making sure that you find a good agent who is there to protect you and look after you.
And indeed the property.
Absolutely.
We know that agents have to be a member of an independent redress scheme.
Yes.
The two membership bodies you mentioned are voluntary.
Yes.
And I think that really shows that agents that are part of one or the other, or sometimes both, are actually very committed to professional standards. And that's why I think it's such a good thing, to look for a Property Mark agent or a RICS agent, because that they have voluntarily committed to have the highest of standards.
I agree, absolutely. They both have codes of practices that the agents need to comply with. But yes, you're right, that they are voluntary. You can also look to make sure that, because you made a very good point about we have to be members of an ombudsman scheme, we also have to offer client money protection.
Yep.
And that should also be on an agent's website as well. So, yeah, it's like anything, isn't it? It's like when you're qualifying your tenants, the more work you do in the background to make and the questions that you ask, just to make sure that you find yourself the right agent.
The due diligence. And talking of tenants, it's going to be so important to do enhanced due diligence on tenants, because the best way to never experience an unsuitable tenant is never to let one over the threshold of your property in the first place. And I do think, with all the concerns about the Renters' Rights Bill and gaining possession of a property, that landlords are going to have to beef up their tenant referencing. You want to make sure that you are getting the best possible tenant into your property, because it is going to be harder to remove them if they prove to be unsuitable.
Absolutely. And this is another area where a good agent will act in your best interest, because what an agent will do is build rapport with these tenants when they're looking for property. So often you're showing them various properties. You get to know the tenant. We call them applicants before they become tenants. You get to know them. You get to know some of their history, where they're living at the moment. If they say they're sleeping on a friend's sofa or living at home with mum and dad or lodging with friends, that can be a red flag. So the more you know about their background and what they're doing, but also their forward plans as well. And then when you meet somebody 2 or 3 times, telling story, talking to you, sometimes something doesn't quite add up, and that's a red flag. And that's when you can, landlord needs to have as much information as possible to make an informed decision, as you all know. And so the more background you can find out about your tenant, then I think, the better position you're in then to make your choice.
Well, indeed. And whenever I'm looking for a new tenant, I will get a list of the applicants who want to move forward into the property from the agent, and I will look at it, and I'll look at all the background history and so on. But I will also ask the agent, what was your kind of gut instinct feel about it? And that really supports what you said about actually meeting the tenant. Do they turn up on time? Do they communicate well? These are all things that, to take into account, aren't they?
Yes, they are, absolutely.
Okay, so what other things can be done to mitigate risk? Because I think, that rent guarantee insurance is going to become an absolutely mainstream product. I've always had it anyway, but a lot of landlords haven't yet really understood the benefit of it. But also things like homeowner guarantors, those are all things that the agents can help with.
Absolutely. And it never ceases to amaze me at the moment of how few landlords take out rent guarantee and legal insurance. And I'm sure it's because they think, right, they've done all the qualifying, they've got a good agent, they're not going to end up, with a bad tenant. But it isn't always just bad tenants. Circumstances can change, can't they? You can find a really good tenant who is made redundant or has a relationship breakup or something happens where their circumstances change and they just can't pay the rent. To have insurance, delighted to hear that you do it. I think it's so sensible, because if something does go wrong, number one, you've got the financial comfort that the rent will be paid by the insurance, but you've also got the comfort that the legal insurance will kick in, and if they need to start court proceedings, it's all taken care of. They'll appoint the solicitor, they will send all the forms in, they will deal with it and go to court and get the possession order. So, and also it's tax deductible.
Quite.
So why wouldn't you? It's like any insurance, isn't it? You don't need it until you need it.
Exactly. It's a famous saying, it's better to have it and not need it.
Absolutely.
Than to need it and not have it. As you say, it's tax deductible, a business expense, and I think worth every penny.
I do as well.
As is a fully managed service.
Absolutely. And also, guarantors are one thing, and they're great, but some tenants can't pass affordability for all sorts of reasons, but they also can't find a guarantor. And so there are going to be guarantor products like an insurance. So if you can't find, the option is, okay, find a guarantor, but if you can't, there is the option of taking out a guarantor insurance that will then secure that property for you. So there will definitely be more products coming onto the market. So I think it's then going to be making sure that you've got the right product that's fit for purpose.
Well, I think that's such a great point you make, Theresa, that there are going to be more products coming onto the market to help landlords about some of the things that they feel are sticking points with the Renters' Rights Bill. So it really is going to be a case of educating landlords and, watching this space and, going and getting information from reputable sources. I've always advocated inventories and midterm property inspections. I absolutely think they are vital. And once again, it chimes with, prevention is better than cure. You can nip a lot of things in the bud with a proper inventory and midterm inspections. Do you think these are likely to become even more vital, certainly in the lens of the decent home standard and picking up quickly on, mold and damp issues and things like that? Because sometimes the tenants don't report it.
No, they don't. Inventories always check-ins and check-outs, and they protect both parties. They protect the landlord and the tenant.
They do.
Because how else can you evidence the condition of a property if you don't have an inventory? And I think that's the same for inspections, for property visits. It's an opportunity, both sides, an opportunity to make sure that the property is being looked after, but also an opportunity for the tenant to point out any possible issues, to look and see if there's any maintenance required. But it's also an opportunity to have a discussion about what your tenant's plans are. Because if they are thinking of moving at some point in the future, to know that in advance can be very helpful. But yes, I'm a strong advocate as well of both.
Excellent. Now, at Savills, you're already planning for the changes that the Renters' Rights Bill is going to bring, because there's a big admin side of everything, different paperwork, different tenancy agreements. What do you think landlords should do to start planning for the Renters' Rights Bill? One thing I thought of was if they've had a tenant sitting on a below market rent for a long period, they might want to think about raising that rent up to market level, and maybe even disposing of some underperforming properties or properties that have had problem tenants consistently for whatever reason.
Yes, maybe there are some properties that just seem to attract the wrong people sometimes. I think there are a few things they can do. Reviewing certainly their rents, but that's a conversation as well to have with your tenant, isn't it? If you've got a really good tenant but they really can't afford to pay anymore, then you need to weigh up what the difference is in the market rent to the rent that you're receiving, build in any void period, and just work it out, think it through. If you are using an agent, have that conversation with your agent and ask your agent what they think you should be doing as well, certainly from your property's perspective. I think if your property needs any maintenance, or if you've got any damp issues in particular, then that's something that needs looking at. It might just mean that you need maybe some air vents or some extraction fans fitted. It depends what it is, but I do think it's worth thinking about that and planning for the future, rather than suddenly maybe having too much expenditure coming at once.
Because there might be a demand for contractors as well, if everybody's doing it all at the last minute.
We do have a big shortage of contractors, I believe 160,000.
Oh.
So certainly as far as energy efficiency is concerned for the future, we have a shortage. So yes, planning's always very important, isn't it?
Well, it is.
We've got some time at the moment to think about that and to work it through.
Well, that's really the point of these videos, and I'm sure you want to join me in thanking Title Guardian for powering this landlord education, because it's much needed, isn't it? And there'll be landlords out there who are living in blissful ignorance of what's coming down the pipe at them. And one of the things that we wanted this video to help landlords with was to provide some survival tips. How can landlords survive the Renters' Rights Bill? Have you got some tips for us?
Well, I think we've probably covered a few of them. I think having a good agent it is very important. I think the referencing and the insurance will all come into it. We haven't touched on the sort of fraudulent activity that can happen out there. It is growing, unfortunately. Via
the kind of so-called rent-to-rent model.
Oh, all sorts.
And social housing rent-to-rent.
Yes, and subletting. Subletting is probably the biggest area of fraudulent activity that we see. So
that's where Title Guardian comes in.
They do, absolutely, because they can pick it up straight away, and then if you can stop it before it even starts, and often when you do pick it up that early and you speak to the tenant, actually they move on because they realise they're not going to get away with it without being caught. Whereas there are lots of landlords where properties are being sublet and the landlord has absolutely no idea, and so that can just continue. But I think looking at the tenants that you've got at the moment, but probably just what we've covered, the making sure that any referencing that you do now, because when this bill comes in next year, lots of landlords will have tenancies running now, or tenancies that will start over the next few months that will cross over into this new legislation.
Exactly.
And that will all change. These changes will affect them. If we have the big bang, which the housing minister wants, then everybody is going to have to comply on that first date. We are challenging that because we think we should have 2 dates. But if that's what happens, then you do need to make sure that you're happy with your tenants at the moment and how things are going.
That's very good advice, because the commencement date will come at some point in 2025. We don't know exactly when, but this video is all about planning for that. So Theresa, thank you so much for being a contributor in this video series. It's really wonderful to have somebody of your credentials and knowledge assisting the landlord community. And we want to just finish by letting everybody know that we do have a downloadable ebook titled The Renters' Rights Bill Survival Guide, and it's going to be featuring all the hints and tips from our expert contributors, and we do invite you to download it. You'll find a link below this video. But please do join us again for the next instalment of our Renters' Rights Bill Survival Guide. But for now, we'll see you next time, and thank you, Theresa.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.